After a wet qualifying, it looked like we were all set up for an absolute classic of a Canadian Grand Prix weekend, but it just didn't quite deliver. Don't get me wrong, it was incredible to be back in Canada. I absolutely love the Canadian Grand Prix. It's one of my favourites on the calendar, but it just didn't quite deliver, even with a safety car right at the end to add in a little bit of trepidation. And you know what? There were still some teams that did incredibly well over the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, but also some teams that were absolutely atrocious. So let's delve into my 3 winners and 3 losers from the Canadian Grand Prix weekend. Let's call this a midfield edition, because I'm going to talk about Ferrari and Red Bull, but I'm going to leave them all the way to the end, because I think the real action this weekend was in the midfield, starting with my first winners being Mercedes, which might seem like a little bit of a strange one to go for as my number 1 winners from the Canadian Grand Prix, but Lewis Hamilton with his 2nd podium of the season so far in a car that he's really still struggling to find grip with in these 2022 regulations. And then George Russell, just the personification of reliability, a top 5 finish again, P4 for him in Canada, and just does it every single time around. But it's that reliability and that consistency that I really love about Mercedes. The fact that they are 3rd in the Constructors' Championships is because they've been able to pick up points whenever Ferrari or Red Bull have had those issues. And Charles Leclerc already taking power unit penalties. We've got Max Verstappen, who's probably going to have to take power unit penalties too. Sergio Perez dropping out of the Grand Prix with a power unit problem, and yet Mercedes are just ticking along, continuing to pick up those points, and are going to sit fairly comfortably in 3rd place, and they're ready to strike if Ferrari or Red Bull do have an issue. Not only that though, we got to see the straight comparison between Lewis Hamilton, George Russell on the same tyres, on the same track, with the same setup, and it looked like Lewis Hamilton just about edged it out in Canada this time around. And I know lots of people have been delving into that story. I myself made a video about George Russell versus Lewis Hamilton and how it's going for those 2 drivers in Mercedes over the course of 2022. I think it's going to look a lot closer in the next few races. I can see Lewis Hamilton picking up a few more podiums. Maybe George Russell finally gets unlucky at some race. It's going to get very, very tight between the 2 of them. I'd love to know in the comments below, who do you think is going to finish higher, Lewis Hamilton or George Russell? But it was much less impressive from the other end of the pit lane. Haas Formula 1 had a terrible Canadian Grand Prix weekend. It looked like it was going to be so good. They locked out the 3rd row of the grid. Mick Schumacher qualifying in 6th place. Kevin Magnussen in 5th in front of him. And let's talk about Kevin Magnussen first, because it's now 5 races in a row where Kevin Magnussen hasn't been able to pick up points. And those 15 points he was able to pick up in the first 4 or 5 races now look really, really shaky. You know, you've got the likes of Ricciardo, Vettel, Tsunoda, Joe even, putting him under a little bit of pressure with only 15 points, and Haas just can't seem to get him over the line this time around. Clipped his front wing, looked like he was going to continue, then got the black and orange flag and completely lost out because of the virtual safety car. Ended up finishing last of all the runners in this Canadian Grand Prix. But then at least he was able to finish the Grand Prix, because my goodness me, Mick Schumacher cannot catch a break right now. It just seems like everything is going wrong for the German driver. Like, since Monaco, he's been under so much pressure. I made a video about him after Monaco, talking about whether or not he was in the right place and the right mindset right now in Formula 1. But you know what? He did what I said and played it super safe in Baku. Just got the car around, made sure he had a really clean weekend under his belt, and now looked like he was going to take that next step forward. Qualified P6, his best qualifying in Formula 1 by an absolute mile, and looked like he was dead set to get some points. And you know what? This one was completely out of his hands. A power unit issue cost him his points, but unfortunately Haas have to go down as one of my losers from this Grand Prix weekend. Whereas Alpine, my 2nd winners from the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, definitely picked up the points that they deserved. A double points finish again. Alonso looks absolutely on fire recently, and Ocon just continuing to keep the party going and continuing to extend that lead over Alfa Romeo that they have in the Constructors' Championship. I know that, you know, Alonso maybe expected more. Even though he got an engine problem and a 5-second penalty, he was still able to finish in 9th place and still picked up a couple more points for himself in the Drivers' Championship, which he really does need at this point in the season after quite a few DNFs for the Spanish driver. And yes, he said he was upset. Obviously, qualifying in P2, he maybe would have expected to sneak a little bit of a podium in that Alpine car, but I think when you've got Max Verstappen in that Red Bull, when you've got the Ferraris, when you've got Mercedes right now, they're just an absolute level above the rest of the midfield teams. And at the end of the day, it should be about 4th place for them in the Constructors' Championship more than anything else. And at this moment in time, McLaren obviously not picking up points means that they're gaining. They're only 8 points behind McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. And for me, I think what Alpine have that no other team has right now in that midfield battle is a car that is consistently good and 2 drivers that are continually delivering in every single Grand Prix right now. I know that, you know, Fernando Alonso had a little bit of an iffy start to the season, but if we look at the points overall and the points finishes for the team, Ocon, 7 points finishes in the first 9 races. Fernando Alonso 5 points finishes in the first 9 races, but with 2 DNFs and a Miami Grand Prix that, you know, he lost out on the points just because of a little bit of a penalty and a technicality towards the end. So you're looking at a team that is consistently in the points every single time around. And right now, you just have to look at the cumulative points. They're gaining on McLaren hand over fist every single Grand Prix weekend, and they are not looking back anytime soon. Which leads me quite nicely to my second losers of the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, which has to be McLaren. And you know what, it might have been my bias, but genuinely I thought McLaren were going to cruise to a 4th place in the Constructors' Championship this year, and they were going to find it fairly easy over the course of the season to keep themselves in front of Alpine and Alfa Romeo. I genuinely think Alfa Romeo and Alpine have a chance to get in front of us in the Constructors' Championship sooner rather than later at this point in the season. It's just every time that it looks like we take a step forward, it looks like we also just take 5 steps backwards and get further behind where we started from. And Lando Norris had his worst qualifying of the season so far, 15th place for him. Yes, there was a reliability issue on the Saturday though. At least Daniel Ricciardo managed to get into the top 10 for only the 4th time this season, but then when it came to Sunday, it all just fell apart anyway. It looked like both cars might be capable of sneaking into the points, especially with Lance Stroll able to get into the points out of nowhere. I thought Lando Norris would be able to get up into 10th place, but the pit stops just absolutely killed it. If you're going to double stack your cars, it has to be pinpoint precise. The front right getting stuck on Daniel Ricciardo's car, and then the mix up for Lando Norris's tyres. Again, it just makes us look embarrassing, and it was embarrassing in Baku because of the talk over the radio between Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo. This is just embarrassing from the team itself and just the pit crew getting it all wrong. I know they're professionals. I know they're under so much pressure, and I really do feel for them. They will definitely be gutted coming home this weekend, but they just need to perform. They just need to get it right, and I'm so frustrated. And I think Alpine genuinely will be ahead of us after the Silverstone weekend. And McLaren might even lose out to Alfa Romeo as well, because they're my 3rd and final winners from the Canadian Grand Prix weekend. Another 7th place finish for Valtteri Bottas, making it look easy. Similar to Esteban Ocon, he's finished 7 out of the 9 races inside of the points and has made it just look so consistent, putting himself within 4 points of Lando Norris in the Drivers' Championship. But let's talk about Joe, because I want to talk about Joe for a second, because I've been really positive about Joe this season. I know lots of people not been really impressed with him, especially because, you know, if they'd have had a driver similar to Valtteri Bottas's caliber, would they be higher up in the Constructors' Championship? Yes, they probably would be. They'd probably be ahead of McLaren already. But actually, Joe has DNF'd 3 times. They've been completely out of his control, including Imola. He's actually DNF'd 4 times if we count that sprint race. And his 2nd points finish is well deserved. None of those DNFs have been his fault. He's continually got a really good grounding in Formula One. He's just put in those laps consistently and got better and better and better over the course of the season. I know he started the season with the points finish. That maybe put a little bit of pressure on his back, but actually since then, he's gotten better and better and better. His finishes have got better and better and better. Got stuck behind Stroll for a little while, got a little bit frustrated, but the points were always in the bag. And I genuinely think that Joe might pick up even more points over the course of the season, and maybe could be the deciding factor in that battle between Alpine, Alfa Romeo and McLaren in that 4th place battle. One team I haven't been mentioning in the 4th place battle though is AlphaTauri, and they are my 3rd and final losers from the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, because it was another weekend of disappointment. You know, after Baku, it genuinely looked like they might put themselves in the mix. They were gaining on Alfa Romeo, gaining on Alpine. They just needed another couple of races in a row where they could click into gear. Pierre Gasly could pick up some consistent points. Yuki Tsunoda could maybe be in there as well, but it just didn't quite happen. It was a really terrible qualifying from them in the wet, and they just couldn't seem to get the tyres warmed up in the right window, and they couldn't quite seem to get it all right for the guys on there, and just were never really part of that midfield bunch where they Yuki Tsunoda into the wall as well after that pit lane exit, causing a safety car. Actually added a little bit of spice to the end of the race, so thank you, Yuki, for that. But in terms of what we want from AlphaTauri, absolutely abysmal. Final thing then, I do just want to touch on Ferrari and Red Bull because they are currently the top of the tree, but don't want to spend too long on it because I feel like this episode is going to be very long already. 4 bullet points. Max Verstappen, cool, calm, collected, looks incredibly good. The only race that he's finished and hasn't won was Monaco. Apart from that, he's been sensational, and even when he was under pressure from Sainz, you wouldn't have known. He was so incredibly consistent. Sergio Perez, reliability issues. Is that him out of the title challenge? No, but it's going to be very difficult with Max Verstappen looking so incredibly good. Poor qualifying from him as well. Not great weekend for Sergio Perez. Carlos Sainz probably looked the best driver on the grid this weekend. Looks really fast and maybe is starting to claw himself back into this title battle. probably a little bit too far out of it now, but needs to get in front of George Russell if he possibly can in the Drivers' Championship. But the start of a resurgence for Carlos Sainz, looked much more comfortable in that Ferrari's car. And then Charles Leclerc, great drive, finished in 5th place, starting in 19th is not very easy at all, scything through the field, and actually Ferrari cost him. If he wouldn't have come out behind Lance Stroll in that traffic, maybe he would have been able to just knock on the door of some of the Mercedes, get in front of George Russell maybe, who wasn't incredibly quick towards the end of the Grand Prix. But 5th place for him, points overall, wasn't too bad at all. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe if you are new. I feel like this is going to be incredibly long, so thank you so much if you watched all the way to the end. Put pineapple in the comments down below. Thank you again. I'll see you next time.